Well, in a nutshell, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and when I was 21, I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and I was by that time I was what I call a full blown addict. Active addiction. 10 years on a 10-year run, I call it. Um, Not so much a low bottom, what we call low bottom criminal justice guy. I'm couch surfing, sleeping in bushes on the bridges from town to town. But anyway, they ended up in the Marine Corps. I took my addiction with me. 2.5 years into my 4-year enlistment, after 12 times of being arrested, 4 times in foreign countries, 5 Article 15s, my battalion commander finally said, "Look, you going to rehab or you going to the brig?" And I knew about the brig, so I said, "Well, hell to rehab, I'll go there." And August 10th, 1982, I began my recovery journey from addiction and alcoholism, and I've been clean and sober ever since. So I got 43 years in recovery right now.
Congratulations, that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But I've always been very, very active. I never was one to fall for the stigma associated with addiction because I didn't care who saw me out there. If they had a gotcha magazine back then, I wouldn't have cared if I was in it or not. So I never bought into the anonymity piece, but I was very well known for the recovery guy in my town. The paint contract for 30 years, had thousands of customers, did very, very well. Everybody knew if anybody had a problem with drugs or alcohol, send them to John. I'm a 12-stepper, constantly going to meetings and I had a spiritual awakening as a result of those steps. I found my true purpose was real, I'm a hope dealer. I give hope and I help people. 2004, me and my wife founded the McShin Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. This was at the height of the stigma, no services, no insurance coverage for treatment or rehab. Just lock them up. Something special about me is I always read the paper, so I'm very well read. I've stayed up with current events my entire life. I have over 50 years experience with our drug war in America. So I devour content, I devour information, I watch every documentary I can about everything. We start this recovery center. I opened my first sober house in 1985, so I was also known as the mayor of sober homes in Richmond. And so I knew when we built up this recovery center, real simple. Any addict, alcoholic, anytime you ask for help, you can come to us and we're going to do our best. The recovery center, we started in a 56 square foot office, but when I retired 2 years ago, we have a 15,000 square foot facility. I left them with 17 sober homes. 7 of them were bought and paid for, a couple of $1 million into charity, government contracts to do jail work, prison work, reentry work. I was very active in policy and lawmaking. We started an advocacy movement, Faces and Voices of Recovery. I was very instrumental in helping Virginia. We got the Narcan bill passed, one of the first red states, got Medicaid expanded. I helped my wife, she's now a retired congressional lobbyist, worked 30 years on Capitol Hill with the mental health and addiction industry. We helped get the 2008 mental health addiction parity bill passed. We helped get it under the Affordable Care Act as one of the 10 essential benefits. The bottom line is, I know what time of day it is. Around 2012, 2014, when we started doing confirmation drug testing in our recovery center, them came up on our radar. I didn't know not much about it. I figured it was like bath salts, because they were selling it next to bath salts in the vape store and stuff. And just backing up a little bit, in 2004, we integrated buprenorphine as a 5-day detox protocol for opiate addicts in our recovery center. So I knew about, these multiple pathways to recovery. They were percolating and emerging. I'm listening. You know what I mean? I'm not scared of multiple pathways. I'm not scared of apps-based pathway, but I know along the way, everybody that tested for kratom, I couldn't find the kratom
Had a nice
boys couldn't tell they were on anything. I asked them, "Why do you take it?" They said, "Well, it helps me not use drugs. It helps me not wanna do opiates. It helps me with my anxiety and all that good stuff." And, I've always followed the cannabis people. I knew cannabis had great value with helping people, and I knew about microdosing, mushrooms, and, I knew about Bill Wilson doing the clinical trials in the '60s with LSD. I'm not scared. Of that, anything that can help somebody, I'm all about.